Welcome to The Frozen Truth. I'm Noah, and a new original story awaits you. A nurse was thrown out of a billionaire's house accused of stealing medication. No one knew she had come there for a reason. For 7 years, Emma Bennett had waited for the moment to settle the score with the man who once destroyed her mother's life. But within a week, she would walk into the boardroom of the country's largest holding company, hold up a single photograph, and hear the billionaire say in front of everyone, "This is my daughter." But she didn't know yet how it would end. The gated community of Silverwood Estates, 40 minutes outside Boston, woke up to its own rules. There were no roosters here, no smell of fresh bread from a bakery. Instead, the air smelled of damp, fallen leaves, expensive diesel from private generators, and something sterile and clean, the kind of scent that only exists where money stopped being a problem long ago and simply became the background hum of life. Nathan Cross pulled out of his gates at exactly 7 in the morning. His dark blue Maybach looked expensive without trying to show off, gliding quietly over a driveway freshly cleared of snow. On his wrist, a Patek Philippe watch caught the light, not new, which mattered. It had been inherited, engraved on the back. That said more about status than any new model ever could. A cashmere coat lay folded neatly on the passenger seat, not tossed, arranged. He was 53. For 22 of those years, he had served as chief financial officer of the Bennett Group Holding Company. 22 years in which he knew where every dollar, every percentage point, every signature lived. He had built his schemes so patiently, so methodically, that even he could no longer say where his work ended and his life began. Richard Bennett had been sick for 3 months. Nathan knew it better than the attending physician. He read the medical reports before Richard even saw them himself. Heart failure combined with the type 2 diabetes, combined with a stubborn refusal to be hospitalized. 61 years old, billions in the bank, and an absolute unwillingness to lie in a hospital bed. Nathan dialed a number saved under a single letter. D. The call was picked up on the first ring. "The new nurse arrives today at 4, he said quietly, evenly, eyes fixed on the road. "Keep an eye on her. Make sure she doesn't ask the wrong questions." "I'll handle it," a woman's voice answered, dry and familiar. Nathan slipped the phone back into his pocket and turned on the radio. Chopin. He always listened to Chopin on his way to work, the one indulgence he allowed himself that had nothing to do with calculation. D stood for Diana Sinclair, Richard's niece, 38 years old, educated in London, twice divorced, a closet full of designer clothes, and a bank account that had been quietly, almost invisibly growing for 4 years, fed by corporate funds from the holding company. Small amounts carefully arranged. Nathan had set it all up. Diana knew, and she said nothing. Because her name was on those records too. They weren't bound by affection, they were bound by a shared secret. And Richard was dying. The will had not yet been rewritten. Emma Bennett arrived by commuter train, a backpack on her shoulders, a faded navy duffel, and a canvas bag of medical supplies. Her black coat had seen more than one winter, a small patch on the sleeve she'd stitched herself with thread that didn't quite match. It was 17 degrees below freezing outside. She bought a cup of coffee from a vending machine at Dedham Station. Cardboard cup, plastic lid, and held it in both hands because her gloves were still in her coat pocket, and digging them out felt like too much effort. She was 29. She'd trained at a small clinic in Springfield, 8 years of practice. A colleague's recommendation had gotten her the job. Richard Bennett had been looking for a home care nurse experienced with cardiac patients. The agency gave him 3 candidates. He chose her sight, unseen from her file alone. She walked from the station, even though the estate was over a mile away. She hadn't called a car. She wanted to walk, to look around, to get a feel for the place. It was a habit of hers, entering new spaces slowly. Halfway there, she saw an old man standing by a neighbouring gate, struggling to fit his key into the lock, his hands shaking. Emma stopped. "Need a hand?" The old man looked up, a little embarrassed. People in this neighbourhood didn't ask for help, and they didn't offer it to strangers either. "If it's not too much trouble," he finally said. She opened the lock on the first try, steady fingers, no rush, no fuss about it, handed the key back and walked on. The old man watched her go. He would recognize her again at the most important moment of all. The gate to the Wright house was dark wrought iron, cold and heavy. The intercom answered immediately. "Bennett," Emma said. "The nurse I'm expected." As the gate slowly slid open, she reached into her backpack pocket and found a pendant, small, silver, warm from being carried close. She closed her fist around it, opened it and put it away again. Diana Sinclair met her in the entryway. A niche perfume, something with cardamom and white pepper, hit her before she even stepped inside. Diana wore a silk loungewear set, ivory white, perfectly tailored, and looked at Emma the way someone looks at a delivery that arrived at the wrong time, in the wrong price bracket. "So, you're the nurse," she said. Not a question. A statement laced with mild disappointment. "Emma Bennett." Diana's eyebrow lifted slightly. "Funny coincidence, sharing a surname with my uncle." She didn't offer her hand. "The rules are simple," she said, turning and walking deeper into the house. Emma followed, leaving her backpack at the door, the way one does in a proper house. "My uncle rests until 10. Medication strictly by the chart. No improvising. If something seems urgent, you come to me first, then the doctor." "It's the other way around for me," Emma said evenly. "I work directly with the attending physician. That's standard protocol." Diana stopped, turned. A pause stretched a few seconds long. Then she smiled, slow, almost friendly. "Of course, I just want my uncle not to worry about the small things." "Understood," Emma said. She said nothing more, but she noticed something. Diana's left hand had trembled, just barely, the instant she smiled. The reflex of someone who'd trained her face to stay composed and forgotten about her hands. A small detail. Emma never forgot details like that. The house was enormous, warm, high-ceilinged, smelling of fresh flowers and expensive wood polish. The floors didn't creak. Everything here was arranged so that no one would ever have to think about anything. But something was wrong. She felt it before she could even name what it was. She didn't know yet that she had less than 2 weeks to figure it out, before it would be too late. Richard Bennett wasn't at all what she'd expected. She'd braced herself for arrogance, the casual entitlement of someone used to being served, the cold courtesy, the wealthy reserve for people who work for them. Instead, she found him sitting in a large leather armchair by the window, wrapped in a plaid blanket, a book on his lap. 61, tired-looking, but his eyes were clear, dark brown, attentive. When Emma walked in, he did something she hadn't expected. He set the book down. "You must be Emma," he said. "Sit down." She perched on the edge of a chair. "I won't pretend I like being looked after," he said without preamble. "I don't like it, but I'm not a fool. Tell me what you're planning to do and why." Emma opened her folder and explained, brief and professional, monitoring schedule, medication adjustments coordinated with the cardiologist, diet, activity within reasonable limits. Richard listened without interrupting, then said, "Fine. One condition. Listen carefully. Don't lie to me, even if you think it's for my own good." Emma looked at him. Agreed. The first few days passed quietly. She did her job, precisely, without fuss. Richard turned out to be a good kind of difficult patient. He asked the right questions, followed instructions, didn't complain. Something like professional respect began to form between them, careful, understated. She kept her distance. That mattered. On the fifth day, she found a discrepancy in the medication log. One of the prescribed drugs, a mild diuretic, was logged as administered but missing from the home medicine cabinet. A small gap. She noted it in her records. By the sixth day, there were 3 such discrepancies. That evening, Nathan Cross stopped her in the hallway. He'd come to visit a sick friend, as he put it. It was the first time Emma had seen him, tall, polished, an impeccable dark blue Italian suit cut perfectly to his frame, restrained, expensive cologne. Everything about him said, "I am a man without sharp edges." "Emma," he said, his voice warm, almost friendly. "I hear you're doing wonderfully." Richard's pleased. "Good to hear. I wanted to ask," he added with a small pause and a smile. "You keep notes, very professional of course, but some details about Richard's condition are, let's say, sensitive. Privacy matters to him." Emma looked at him steadily. "I'm required to keep an observation log. It's a medical requirement." "Of course," he said immediately. "Of course, just no need to share that information with anyone outside, the press, for instance." A pause. "Or with people who might misread Richard's condition during difficult moments." Emma held his gaze exactly as long as needed. "My records go to the attending physician, no one else." He nodded, smiled again, a touch tighter than before, and left. She went back to her room, shut the door, and pulled out her phone. She texted the cardiologist. "Need to meet in person, questions about the medication schedule." Only then did she unclench the other hand, the one she had kept in her pocket throughout the conversation, and felt the numbness slowly drain from her fingers. She didn't sleep that night. Her room, small by the standards of that house but spotless, looked out over the yard. Snow lay thick, faintly blue in the moonlight. Beyond the fence, a distant highway hummed, barely audible. Emma sat on the bed, knees drawn up, holding the pendant in her palm, silver, coin-sized. Inside, under a small glass cover, a photograph, a young woman laughing, wind in her hair, no older than 25, her mother. Claire Bennett had died when Emma was 6. Pneumonia? In a small-town hospital that didn't have the right medications, while the specialists who could have helped were 200 miles away in the city. She died, quickly, quietly, the way people without money or connections often do. No heroics, no tragedy, just a person who stopped existing. Emma grew up in her aunt's cramped apartment, 5 rooms, 7 tenants, 1 kitchen that always smelled like someone else's cooking and damp laundry on a clothesline. She became a nurse, not out of some childhood dream, but because it was something concrete, needed, something that couldn't be taken away. At 22, she found the documents. Among her mother's things, in a cardboard box tied with string that her aunt kept in the attic, was an old handwritten letter, addressed to Claire Bennett. Sender, Richard Bennett. She read it 3 times before it sank in. Her father was alive, wealthy, and had left her mother before she was even born. Quietly, cleanly, with a one-time payment, and then he vanished. Her mother took the money out of pride, out of pain, out of a need to start over somewhere new, and she died there, alone. Emma carried that knowledge for 7 years. First hatred, sharp and burning, almost physical. Then something more complicated. Then a plan, precise, calculated, get in, get close, learn him, and tear down what he'd built. Not for the money. For her mother. For the little girl in that cramped apartment who never understood why everyone else had a father and she didn't. She squeezed the pendant tighter. Outside, a light snow was falling. Silent. She didn't know yet, and that not knowing would, within weeks, turn everything upside down, that her plan would fall apart. Not because she'd make a mistake, but because Richard Bennett would turn out to be nothing like the man she'd hated for 7 years. But she didn't know that yet. She tucked the pendant under her pillow and closed her eyes. The following week, Emma met with Richard's cardiologist, Dr. Gerald Simmons, an older, careful man with cautious eyes. They talked in his car in a shopping centre parking lot, his suggestion, which put her on guard immediately. "There's a discrepancy in the log," she said without preamble, showing him her notes. He studied the pages for a long time, took off his glasses, cleaned them, put them back on. "Emma," he said, "I've worked with Richard for 5 years. I understand exactly what you're seeing, but you need to understand the relationships in that house are complicated. Nathan Cross is a man with influence. A patient isn't receiving part of his prescribed medication." She cut in quietly. "That's not a question of complicated relationships. I understand what you're about to do." A long silence. Snow fell against the windshield. "I'll talk to Nathan," he finally said. In that moment, she understood he wouldn't help, not because he was a bad man, but because he had something to lose too. She got back to the house by evening. Diana caught her in the hallway. "I heard you met with Dr. Simmons." Her voice was sweet, her smile cool. "Without checking with me first." "He's the attending physician," Emma said. "No checking required." "You see," Diana said, stepping closer. And Emma caught the smell of her perfume, heavy, sweet, bitter underneath. "In this house, it's customary to inform me first. It's a matter of trust. If trust is an issue, I work with Richard," Emma said. "Not with you." Diana stepped back, smiled again. "I just want you to understand, in this house, everyone has their role, and the nurse's role is to care for the patient, not to investigate." That same night, a housekeeper came to Emma's room apologetic and asked her to move her things. A guest had requested the room. They moved her into a windowless storage closet by the service entrance, 6 feet by 9, with heating pipes that creaked all night. Clean sheets had been laid out on the mattress, the one courtesy extended to her. Emma made the bed in silence, hung her coat on a hook, set her backpack in the corner, then took out her notebook and, by the light of her phone, began writing down dates, dosages, names. They were trying to break her down through small humiliations, make daily life unbearable enough that she'd leave on her own. She understood that. She wasn't going to leave. But she didn't know yet that in 2 days Diana would make a move that would pull the ground out from under her. A different game, entirely. It happened on a Wednesday, around noon. Richard took a turn for the worse. Not critical, but noticeable. Emma took his vitals, adjusted his dosage within her authority, and called the cardiologist. Standard procedure. That evening, Nathan Cross arrived with a lawyer. 3 of them gathered in the living room. Nathan, Diana, and a man in a grey suit holding a folder. Emma was invited in politely, formally, as if to a business meeting. "Emma," Nathan began, his voice quiet, almost sympathetic, "we found a shortage in the home medicine cabinet. Several packages of medication are missing." Something tightened sharply under her ribs. "I keep a log," she said. "Everything is documented." "Yes, we saw your log." He opened the folder. "But here's what's strange. Several entries you logged as administered to Richard were, in fact, never taken. We checked the pill dispenser." A pause. "Where did the medication go, Emma?" The air in her throat went thick. She took a slow breath, something she knew how to do. 8 years of practice. "This isn't my shortage," she said evenly. "This is the same shortage I already reported to Dr. Simmons. Medication was disappearing before I ever arrived." "Can you prove that?" "I can." "Compare the dates in my log against the first discrepancy." "Emma," Nathan said gently, "no one's saying this was intentional. Maybe just carelessness, distraction. It happens." Diana said nothing, staring at the table, her fingers laced together, knuckles white. "We won't be calling the police for now," Nathan said, "but I'm afraid we'll have to terminate your contract." The next morning, Emma walked out of the estate's front gate, backpack on her shoulders. She held the pendant in her fist the entire way to the station. She rented a room in Dedham, $60 a night, an elderly landlady who didn't ask questions. The room smelled like an old rug and a cat. The radiator barely worked. Emma slept in socks and a sweater. She called the agency. "You understand," they told her, "with a reference like this, we can't place you in another private home." She called Dr. Simmons. He didn't pick up. Later he texted, "Emma, I'm truly sorry. There's nothing I can do." She sat by the window. Outside, the street carried on, ordinary, indifferent, a bus rattling past, children laughing about something of their own near the next building. She didn't cry. She just sat very still, while something inside her quietly rearranged itself. She thought about her mother, how she, too, had probably once sat like this, alone in a strange city, carrying a small secret, deciding what to do next, and chose to leave and stay silent and died in silence. Emma opened her notebook and went back through her notes, dates, dosages, names, signatures in the log. Nathan Cross had destroyed her reputation, but he hadn't destroyed her records because he didn't know one thing. She had photographed the log every single night since her first day. Every page. Methodical to the bone. A habit from a childhood where you couldn't rely on anyone but yourself, and on precision. She closed the notebook, sat a while longer, then wrote a message. "I need to meet with you. It's about your father." Recipient, Richard Bennett. The reply came an hour later, not from Diana, from Richard himself, bypassing her entirely. "I know what happened. Come tomorrow. I've already made one call." He called her himself, his voice rough and tired. He told her he'd fired the housekeeper the day before for informing on her, that he'd personally questioned the cook who'd seen exactly how the medicine cabinet was stocked before Emma ever arrived, that he wasn't a fool, that he was sick, not blind. Then, after a short pause, he said quietly, "Emma, I want to ask you something directly. Your mother, her name was Claire." Her stomach clenched tight and hard. Her fingers gripped the phone. "Yes," she said, her voice steady, almost steady. A long silence. "Then come," he said. "We need to talk." She hung up and sat motionless for a long time. He'd known already, or he'd only just realized. She didn't yet understand what this meant for her plan, for the hatred she'd carried for 7 years. But she knew one thing clearly, not joy, not triumph, only a quiet, icy clarity, like a January dawn, cold, white, without shadows. She knew what to do. She came the next day. Richard met her in his study, not in his armchair, but sitting upright at his desk, visibly costing him effort, but he sat straight. They talked for 2 hours. He told her what hadn't been in the letter, that he had looked for Claire, that the money had been her request, not his way of buying her off, that she hadn't wanted a relationship, hadn't wanted his name, hadn't wanted him in the child's life, that he hadn't pushed, and it still tormented him, that he'd hired a private investigator 10 years later and learned that Claire had died, and that his daughter was living with an aunt in a small town, going to school. "I saw your photographs," he said, through the investigator. "You were so small. I didn't dare show up. Too late. Too many years gone." Emma listened without interrupting, then said quietly, not looking at him, "She died of pneumonia because the local hospital didn't have the medication she needed." He closed his eyes for a few seconds. "I know," he said. "I found out. Too late." His voice cracked. "It's not an excuse. It's just what happened." A long pause, long as a winter evening. Emma took the pendant from her pocket and set it on the table between them. Richard looked at it, and something in his face shifted in a way that made her look away. "It's her photograph," Emma said. "I can see that," he said, barely audible. She didn't forgive him that day. She still doesn't know if she ever will. That isn't this story. But she decided one thing. Whatever Nathan Cross was doing to a sick, lonely man, she would stop it. Not for revenge. For justice. Because she knew too well what it looked like when someone was betrayed by the very people meant to protect them. An ally appeared on his own. It turned out to be the same old man whose lock she'd opened on her first day. Walter Higgins, 81, 3 years retired from the state prosecutor's office. He called Richard himself, said he'd seen the young woman thrown out the gate, that the story had caught his interest, and that he still had an old friend at the district attorney's office. Emma laid out photographs of the logs on the table. Walter put on his glasses and read, slowly, unhurried. Then he took the glasses off, folded them carefully into their case. "The annual shareholders' meeting is next week," Richard said. "Press, partners, the whole family. It's the perfect setting." "Are you sure?" Emma asked. "It's public." "That's exactly why," he said. The following days went into gathering documents. The Bennett Group conference hall on the 21st floor of a tower in downtown Boston's financial district was built for 80 people. That day it was filled to the ceiling, crystal chandeliers, the smell of coffee and fresh flowers, orchids lining the walls, a low murmur of voices, reporters with badges and recorders, shareholders in expensive suits, lawyers, partners from 3 countries. Nathan Cross walked in 12 minutes before the meeting started. He wore his best suit, dark blue with a faint pinstripe, the Patek Philippe on his wrist, cologne measured and confident, like a signature on a contract. He shook hands, exchanged a few words, smiled modestly with dignity. He was certain he controlled everything happening in that room. Diana sat in the front row in a beige Valentino jacket, a strand of real, substantial pearls at her throat. She checked her phone twice. Everything was going to plan. Richard would speak briefly, announce Nathan's promotion to Chief Operating Officer, the next planned step, and then there would be a reception. A simple, clean, beautiful plan. Richard walked onto the stage slowly, leaning on a cane. The room stood. Nathan watched him walk and thought, 6 more months, maybe a year, and then it's over. By then the paperwork would be properly filed, the shares reassigned, the structure reorganized so cleanly that no one would ever prove a thing. Richard reached the microphone, paused and said, "I want to start today not with numbers. I want to start with the truth." Nathan's eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't in the script. "Over the past 3 months of my illness," Richard said, "several people in this room made decisions that directly threatened my life and my company. Today I want everyone here to know exactly what those decisions were." The room went still. The murmur cut off as sharply as house lights dimming in a theatre. Nathan felt something in his chest, fast and unpleasant. He didn't move. He held his face steady. "I'd like to ask Emma Bennett to join me on the stage," Richard said. And that's when Nathan saw her. She rose from her seat in the 3rd row, black trousers, white blouse, hair pulled back. She walked to the stage at a steady pace, unhurried, not looking back, a tablet in her hand. Nathan leaned forward slightly, the muscles in his jaw tightening. Emma stood beside Richard and connected the tablet to the screen. The big screen filled with pages. An observation log, photographs, dates, dosages. "This is the medical observation log kept on Richard Bennett," said Walter Higgins, rising from the 4th row and stepping slightly to the side. 81 years old, 35 years with the state prosecutor's office. "I'd like to draw your attention to the column of dates." Next slide. corporate account statements, transfers, amounts, dates. This data was turned over to the district attorney's financial crimes unit 3 days ago, Walter said. Systematic transfers from the corporate account to 2 personal accounts. Over 4 years, the total comes to just under $15 million. Someone in the room exhaled, quietly. Also on screen, a medical review. Walter continued. Conclusion: the patient was systematically denied a portion of his prescribed medication. This slowed his recovery. Investigators are now determining whether this was deliberate. Nathan stood. This is absurd, he said, his voice steady and firm. This is a manipulation orchestrated by Nathan Cross, Walter said, without raising his voice. You'll be asked to give a formal statement. I'd recommend calling your lawyer right now. 2 men in plain clothes stood at the doors, documents in hand. Nathan stared at the screen, at the numbers, at the dates, then slowly lowered his eyes to the table. The blood drained from his face, visible even from a distance. He gripped the back of his chair, knuckles white against the dark wood, and sank back into it, slow and unsteady, suddenly looking every one of his years. Diana jumped up from the front row, her pearls swinging. She took 2 steps toward the exit. Diana, Richard said into the microphone, quiet, please, sit down. She stopped, looked around. 80 pairs of eyes, cameras, recorders, and slowly sank back into her chair. Emma stood on the stage beside Richard, not looking at Nathan, looking out steadily at the room. In her left fist, at her hip, she held the pendant. She hadn't even noticed taking it out. Richard stepped toward the microphone. I want everyone here to know, he said, that standing beside me right now is the one person in this house who told me the truth when it was costly and dangerous to do so. A pause. Her name is Emma Bennett, and she is my daughter. The room seemed to stop breathing. Emma didn't move, only tightened her grip on the pendant, felt the sharp edge of the silver clasp press into her palm. She turned slowly toward Nathan, still sitting in his chair, staring at the table, the face of a man realizing for the first time that he had lost. She said quietly, almost without inflection, almost without sound, nothing more. I've already said everything. She turned and walked off the stage. Nathan was detained as he left the building. 2 agents from the Financial Crimes Unit, polite without a scene, the way it's done for people of his standing. His phone, tablet and folder were taken right there in the elevator. His accounts were frozen within 2 hours before he even managed to call his lawyer. Diana left in a cab, not her own car. It turned out to be registered to the corporate account, and the company's legal team had already filed for seizure. She was photographed in the elevator without her jacket, in just her blouse, phone to her ear, talking loud and fast. No one approached her. The press got their pictures. 4 months passed. May arrived late, cold but real. Outside Boston, the cherry blossoms finally bloomed, heavy white clusters dropping petals onto the wet pavement, the scent sharp, almost painful. Emma opened the window in her office and just stood there, breathing. The office was small, inside the building of the charity foundation she and Richard had opened in March. The foundation was named Claire's Promise, no explanation needed. It funded medical equipment for small-town hospitals, quietly, without publicity, methodically, aimed at concrete results. That was exactly how Emma worked. She picked up her mug of tea, hot, mint, and ran her thumb along its warm side, just because. Lucas, a young doctor from a small town who'd been hired as coordinator, walked past in the hallway, talking on the phone, laughing loudly, unrestrained. Emma smiled into her mug. She and Richard saw each other twice a week, sometimes for work, sometimes just because. They didn't call it father and daughter, not yet. That word still needed time. They both understood that, and neither one rushed it. One day he brought her an envelope. Inside was an old photograph, the same woman, young, laughing, just larger. Better quality than the tiny one in the pendant. Emma took it, studied it for a long time. "Where did you get this?" "She sent it to me when you were born," he said, his voice very quiet. "She wrote, 'You have a daughter. She's growing up fine.' Don't write again." Emma nodded, slipped the photo into her pocket, then said, "She wouldn't have wanted me to hate you. It took me a long time to get there, but I think I have." Richard didn't answer. He just nodded. That was enough. Nathan Cross was formally charged with fraud and grand larceny. The investigation lasted 8 months. His lawyer was good, but the evidence was better. He left the courtroom with a suspended sentence and an order to repay damages. All his assets, including the house in Silverwood Estates and accounts at 2 banks, were seized and eventually applied toward the debt. The engraved Patek Philippe sold at auction to a stranger for a fraction of its worth. Nathan rented an apartment in Worcester and took on small consulting jobs for local businesses. No one in serious business would touch him again. Diana lost her access to corporate funds immediately, of course. The villa she'd considered her own on the Amalfi Coast was put up for sale by the management company that actually owned it. Her belongings came back in 3 suitcases. The society pages ran a short, merciless item about it. No photos, which was, somehow, worse. She moved away. No one asked where. No one took revenge on anyone. It was simply time to settle the accounts. What's taken without right eventually comes back, with interest. In May, on one of the first warm days, Emma drove to Springfield. The cemetery was quiet. The birch trees were already in young, pale, almost translucent leaf, the air smelling of wet earth and the first flowers of the year. She didn't know which ones. She stood by her mother's grave for a while, saying nothing out loud. She rarely said the important things out loud. Then she took out the pendant, opened it, and looked one last time at the small photograph. A woman laughing, wind catching her hair, and set it down on the headstone beside the bouquet of cherry blossoms she'd brought with her. Not because she wanted to be rid of it, not because she'd forgiven everything, but because for 7 years she had carried it like a debt, like a weight, like a justification. And now, finally, she could set it down. She breathed slowly, deeply. The birch leaves rustled overhead. Then she turned and walked toward the gate. The pendant stayed behind. Dear listeners, this story is finished, but its question lives on. Emma walked into that house carrying hatred. She walked out carrying something else. Not forgiveness yet, but no longer hatred either. Tell me, could you have done the same in her place? Could you have set aside a plan for revenge if the person in front of you turned out not to be a monster, but a sick old man with less time left than you thought? Or is the truth sometimes simply too heavy to walk away from? Write it in the comments. I genuinely want to know, and I read every single one. If this story moved you, give it a like. It's a small gesture, but it helps the story find the people who need it. And subscribe so you don't miss the next one. See you soon.